But it was wonderful to meet him because he was such a hero to us. And I mean, actually meet him.
And he was just a beautiful guy. And he just wound up the Marshalls and just started playing very loud.
When you think of musical geniuses who helped shape the sound of rock and roll, Paul McCartney isn't just on the list. He defines it. From the Beatles to Wings to a legendary solo career, he spent over 6 decades writing the songs that shaped generations. But even legends have their own heroes. Behind the fame, the fortune, and the flawless melodies is a man who never stopped listening. Paul wasn't just a superstar. He was, and still is, a passionate fan, a student of the craft, someone who lights up when talking about music that moves him. Those closest to him have seen it, the way his eyes sparkle when he talks about a certain solo or chord progression, the excitement in his voice when he breaks down a melody like a wide-eyed schoolboy discovering a new sound. He may be one of the greatest to ever do it, but he's also someone who's never stopped learning from others. And today, we're counting down the 5 rock stars Paul McCartney loved the most, the ones who didn't just impress him, they inspired him. But don't get too confident with your guesses. One of the names on this list will absolutely shock you. Number 1. Jimi Hendrix, the guitar that spoke. At the top of Paul McCartney's list was someone he always called the greatest guitarist who ever lived, Jimi Hendrix. This wasn't just a casual compliment. Paul meant it with all his heart. From the first time he saw Hendrix play live, something changed inside him. It happened at a small club in London called the Bag o' Nails. Paul and a few other rock stars like Pete Townsend and Eric Clapton were there, just enjoying a normal night out. Then Hendrix walked in. He was still new to the British music scene. But the moment he picked up his guitar, everything changed. His sound was wild, full of emotion and power. Paul watched in awe. It wasn't just Hendrix's skill. It was the way he felt the music. Paul later said it was like Jimmy wasn't just playing the guitar. He was speaking through it. Every note had meaning. Every strum told a story. And then came a moment that truly sealed Hendrix in McCartney's heart. Just 2 days after the Beatles released their legendary album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Jimmy played its title track live at a London theater. He had already learned it, and he played it loud, proud, and brilliantly. Paul couldn't believe it. To him, that performance was the highest kind of respect. Over the years, Paul never stopped praising Hendrix. He talked about him in interviews, called him a genius, and remembered him as someone with both amazing talent and a kind soul. He wasn't arrogant at all, Paul said. He was just a great guy. For Paul McCartney, Hendrix wasn't just a rock star. He was a once-in-a-lifetime artist who made music feel bigger, deeper, and more alive. And that's why Hendrix stands at number 1. Number 2. Eddie Van Halen, the sound of the future. If Hendrix was the soul of the guitar, Eddie Van Halen was the future of it. Paul McCartney may have come from the early days of rock and roll, but he never stopped listening to what came next. And when Van Halen's explosive style burst onto the scene in the late 1970s, Paul paid attention. Eddie Van Halen wasn't just fast, he was different. His guitar didn't sound like anyone else's. He tapped, shredded, and made wild sounds that seemed impossible to copy. But Paul didn't just love the flash. What impressed him most was Eddie's balance. He knew when to explode with speed and when to slow down, letting a single note hang in the air. Paul once said that great music isn't just about showing off. It's about feeling, and that's what he respected most in Eddie's playing. He knew when to let the guitar breathe, Paul noted. He didn't just play fast, he played smart. This thoughtful side of Eddie reminded Paul of his own songwriting style. Paul always believed that melody came first, that a simple tune could touch the heart more than 1,000 fast notes. Eddie, despite being a technical wizard, understood that too. Even though they never played together, Paul followed Van Halen's career closely. He called his work boundary-pushing and exciting, and when Eddie passed away, Paul shared kind words about him, saying he was a great talent who changed the way people saw the guitar. To McCartney, Eddie Van Halen represented a new generation, one that took rock and roll and blasted it into the stratosphere. And even as Paul grew older, he never stopped admiring younger players who brought something fresh to the table. It takes a big person to praise those who came after you, especially when you're Paul McCartney, a man who helped build the very foundation of modern music. But Paul never saw it that way. He didn't act like a gatekeeper. He acted like a fan. And that's what made his admiration for Van Halen so real. In the end, Eddie Van Halen didn't just impress McCartney with his skills. He earned Paul's respect by understanding the art of music, the power of timing, emotion, and knowing when less is more. That's why Eddie easily earns a spot on Paul's list of the rock stars he loved the most. Number 3. David Gilmore, the master of emotion. Paul McCartney has always been a fan of musicians who play with heart, not just hands. That's why David Gilmore, the legendary guitarist from Pink Floyd, holds such a special place in Paul's mind. Gilmore didn't just play notes. He made people feel something, and that's what Paul loved the most. Their first big connection came in the 1980s, when Gilmore played a soaring solo on Paul's song No More Lonely Nights. From that moment, McCartney knew Gilmore wasn't just another rock guitarist. He was something more. Over the years, they crossed paths in studios and on stages, and every time, Paul came away impressed. Gilmore's playing is soft, deep, and thoughtful. He doesn't rush. He doesn't show off. Every note he plays feels like it belongs there, like it's part of a bigger story. Paul once said that Gilmore's solos were like painting with sound. That's a big compliment coming from someone who's spent a lifetime writing unforgettable melodies. What really stood out to Paul was the emotion in Gilmore's music. He believed that true greatness came from being able to move people, and when Gilmore played, especially on Pink Floyd tracks like Comfortably Numb or Shine on You Crazy Diamond, that emotion was front and center. It wasn't about being the fastest or the loudest. It was about making people feel something real. Paul has often praised Gilmore's genius, not just as a guitarist, but as a full artist. To him, Gilmore understood music on a deep level. His work created entire atmospheres, not just sounds. And for someone like Paul, who's always valued storytelling in music, that meant a lot. But their relationship wasn't just professional. It was also personal. McCartney once described Gilmore as kind, humble, and a gentleman. They shared mutual respect, and Paul was always glad to have Gilmore on board when they worked together. In a world full of ego and competition, Gilmore's quiet strength stood out. Many guitarists have tried to copy Gilmore's tone or technique, but what Paul loved was the soul behind it. You can teach someone how to play fast. You can't teach them how to feel the way Gilmore does when he plays. That's something special. So when Paul McCartney thinks about the rock stars who've truly touched him, David Gilmore is right there near the top. Not because of flash or fame, but because of depth, grace, and the power to stir emotions through sound. That's what great music is all about. And that's why David Gilmore earned Paul's love and admiration, not just as a guitarist, but as an artist. Number 4. Eric Clapton, the timeless craftsman. Eric Clapton isn't just a name in rock history. He's one of the pillars of it. And for Paul McCartney, Clapton's legacy is more than just impressive, it's inspiring. Paul's respect for Clapton goes way back, and it's only grown stronger over time. Their relationship began in the late 1960s, during the Beatles era. In fact, it was George Harrison who invited Clapton to play the unforgettable guitar solo on While My Guitar Gently Weeps. Paul saw firsthand how Eric approached music, calm, confident, and completely focused. That solo became one of the most iconic in Beatles history, and Paul never forgot the way Clapton made the guitar sing. But McCartney's admiration didn't stop there. As the years passed, Clapton's style matured. He moved from wild blues riffs to more emotional, soulful playing. And Paul noticed. He's often said that Clapton's later work is what really touched him. It wasn't just about being a guitar god anymore. It was about expressing life through sound. What Paul admired most about Clapton was his ability to grow. Many musicians stay stuck in one era. Clapton didn't. He evolved. His music gained wisdom. He began to play not just with skill, but with feeling and experience. Paul called this musical maturity, and it's something he truly values. And let's not forget, they weren't just colleagues. They were friends. McCartney and Clapton shared the stage, shared stories, and even shared grief. When George Harrison passed away, both men came together to honor him. Their bond, formed through decades of music, became something deeper. Clapton's strength, in Paul's eyes, is that he never relied on flash. Sure, he could play fast and loud, but he didn't have to. He let the guitar do the talking in a quiet, soulful way. Paul once said Clapton had nothing to prove and everything to express. That's a powerful statement coming from someone who's seen it all. Clapton also had a sound all his own. Whether playing blues, rock, or acoustic ballads, you always knew when it was him. Paul respected that uniqueness. He believed that true artists find their voice and stick to it. So when McCartney thinks about the rock stars who shaped his own journey, Eric Clapton is a no-brainer. His talent, his growth, and his soul made a lasting impression. Clapton wasn't just a player, he was a storyteller, and Paul loved that about him. In a world full of big personalities and showy tricks, Clapton stood out by being real. And that's exactly why Paul McCartney holds him in such high regard. Number 5, George Harrison, the quiet soul who left a loud impact. While Paul McCartney has praised many guitarists over the years, there's one name that holds a special, emotional place in his heart: his fellow Beatle, George Harrison. They grew up together, played together, and changed the world together. And though their relationship had its ups and downs, Paul has always spoken with deep affection and admiration for George as both a person and a musician. George wasn't the flashiest member of the Beatles. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but he had a quiet strength, a calm, thoughtful presence that made his music unforgettable. Paul often called him the quiet Beatle, but never in a negative way. George had a way of letting his guitar speak for him, and when it did, it spoke volumes. Paul has said that George's playing was never about showing off. It was about finding the perfect note at the perfect moment. From the twangy beauty of Something to the swirling sounds of Here Comes the Sun, George had a gift for creating melodies that stayed with people. He didn't need wild solos to stand out. He made simplicity powerful, and even beyond the Beatles, Paul continued to admire George's growth as a musician. In his solo career, George explored deeper themes, new instruments, and even spiritual sounds. Paul watched that evolution with pride. He once said that George found his own voice after the Beatles, and that it was beautiful to see. Their bond was more than musical, it was personal. They were like brothers, and like many brothers, they had moments of disagreement, especially in their later years together. But through all of it, Paul never stopped caring for George. When George was battling illness in the late 90s and early 2000s, Paul visited him, held his hand, and said goodbye with love and respect. After George passed, Paul described him as my little brother and said he felt lucky to have shared so much with him. What makes George so special on this list is not just his talent, though he had plenty of that. It's the way he impacted Paul's life on every level. They started as teenagers in Liverpool, dreaming about music. Then they became part of one of the biggest bands in history. Through it all, George's presence helped shape Paul's own understanding of music, friendship, and what it means to grow as an artist. To Paul McCartney, George Harrison wasn't just a great guitarist. He was a part of his soul, someone who understood him without needing to say much. And in the end, that deep connection is what truly makes George one of the rock stars Paul loved the most. Paul McCartney has spent his life at the top of the music world, from playing sold-out stadiums to writing songs that generations still sing. He's done it all. But what sets him apart isn't just his talent, it's his heart. Through all the fame, Paul never stopped being a fan, a student, a listener. The 5 rock stars we've talked about, Jimi Hendrix, Eddie Van Halen, David Gilmore, Eric Clapton, and George Harrison, weren't just guitar heroes. To Paul, they were storytellers, innovators, and soul shakers. Each one brought something special to the table. Each one reminded him that music isn't about ego. It's about emotion, connection, and truth. In a world that often rushes to crown the greatest, Paul McCartney shows us that greatness comes in many forms. Sometimes it's loud and wild. Sometimes it's soft and deep. Sometimes it's in a quiet smile between old friends. And maybe that's why Paul's still here, still creating, still inspiring. Because even after all this time, he hasn't closed the book. He's still learning, still loving, still letting music move him. These 5 rock stars helped shape that journey. And in honoring them, we get a glimpse into the heart of the man behind the music. Sir Paul McCartney, not just a legend, but a true admirer of the legends around him.